to be honest, I've had this starter for probably about 10 years. I guess at places I've worked, we've called it Martha, but that was like a long time ago. But we'll call it Martha. Why not? I'm Nora Allen. I'm the head baker at Mel the Bakery on Lower East Side, and today we're gonna make some sourdough. When you wanna make sourdough, which is basically just capturing a lot of yeasts that are naturally in the air around us all the time, as well as bacteria called lactobacilli, you basically catch those all in flour and water, and that is what our starter is. When mixing your starter, you first wanna get either tap water or sort of warmer water, like 74 degrees. And you basically just wanna do equal parts water and flour. So I'm pouring 100 grams of water. This is part of my original starter. This puppy is pretty old. It comes from an even older starter, but it's about 10 years old. So when feeding your starter, you take your old starter and you add about 20% by weight. So that means about 20 grams. Equal parts white and whole wheat flour. This will be ready to actually mix bread with in 2.5 to 3 hours. It's time for us to do our first mix on this bread. Basically with your first mix, don't overthink it. The only point of it is to saturate your flours. So here we have our bread flour, basically a higher protein type of AP. Then we have our whole wheat, which you could substitute as a whole grain. And here we have spelt, which you could use rye if you have that. Spelt and rye, slightly different, but they both sort of promote fermentation. It's kind of like adding gasoline in the fire. So basically, we're gonna start by taking our water, pouring it into our bowl, and I'm just gonna actually withhold like about a tablespoon. This we're gonna use to do our final mix. Then add our bread flour, whole wheat, spelt, and again, the only thing you really need to make sure you do on a first mix is you just wanna make sure you don't have any flour clumps. You just want the water to fully saturate it. If you find that you need to add just a splash more water to make sure that happens, that's totally okay. Water is your friend in bread recipes. Just kind of pinching even. It's pretty straightforward. I'm gonna actually just add a tiny bit more water. With sourdough, you really can interpret as much as you want. We're using several flours as it really does build a more complex flavor. I mean, you can do all bread flour that's like white bread and it's delicious and there's a time and place for it. But in terms of like if you wanna get like that really like delicious smell, flavors, stuff like that, using a couple different flours kind of like helps that out. So this is our first mix, typically only like 1.5 to 2 minutes. You'll see there's no flour patches, it's all just kind of a tacky, almost glue. And really at this point, you're kind of just allowing the gluten to develop. That's when we're actually gonna cover this and walk away from it. That period of time, 20 minutes to an hour, hour and a half, it's actually called an autolyse. And in that time, you'll see this dough that looks really, really tacky begin to become more what you would think of as a dough, like stretchy, smooth. Cover it, let it hang out. We've been waiting for 30 minutes. At this point, we're gonna uncover our flour and water, and we're gonna begin our second mix. This part takes about twice as long as your first mix because you're trying to build strength. And you also have a lot more things to get in here. You have to mix your starter, which we mixed before this all started. It's nice and ripe, it's bubbly. If you're ever curious about when to start your final mix, something I always tell everyone is a starter that can leaven bread will always float in a glass of water. You can see it floating very strongly. Our final mix is starting. Still just flour and water. At this point, I'm kind of just, I like to rotate the bowl as I do this, but you pull and press. You'll sort of start feeling some resistance. This is like, the technical term is you're building strength. You can see it sort of beginning to look a little bit more like bread dough as we're doing this. After it all sort of starts holding together, like I'm picking it up, you kind of have enough strength in there to mix in your sourdough starter. I'm just gonna grab my scale, just cause you know, we wanna be so consistent, but if you don't have a scale, you can just add about 2 tablespoons in here, 20 grams. Use a little bit of water, sort of just Make sure you get every last drop of that in here. It's a nice sort of meditative thing. You can focus on your breathing, do whatever you want. So you're kind of just sort of starting at the outside edges and pulling and pushing into the center, like so. I'm pretty much kneading this pulling action and twisting into the center for a couple minutes. I would say maybe 4 minutes. Lastly, I will add the salt. Salt is usually added last because it makes your dough tighten up. It also sort of starts to regulate your fermentation in your starter. It's usually added within the last 2 minutes of mixing. Sprinkle it all over. You just want to make sure it's well incorporated. I tell people small or large batch, always mix for 2 minutes after you add the salt. So right now I'm just kind of like making sure there's no patches of salt anywhere. You really just want to make sure that your dough is nice and strong and well incorporated. Another thing to keep in mind home baking is you really actually want your sourdough to be nice and warm. Like you want it to be between 74 and 76 degrees Fahrenheit. People will just turn the oven on in their kitchen and set the dough by the oven. That's a great idea. Don't be afraid. I think there's a lot of fears of killing starters. A, you're not gonna kill your starter, most resilient bacteria around. B, you're not gonna overmix your dough if you're doing it by hand. It's really hard to do. But if you do, it will look like weird toothpastey white and like not hold any structure. Like you wouldn't be able to grab it like this. It would all kind of like slink apart. I've never seen anyone do it by hand. We're just gonna cover this and let it relax. At every hour, every 60 minutes, return to your dough and perform a fold. But right now, I'm just gonna put this guy to sleep. Turning really helps with the shape and the final structure of your dough. So you do it once every hour. If it's super wet dough, you might do it once every half an hour. Even if it still feels kind of mushy in the mixer, a time of bulking and folds and turns, it will really gain a lot of that strength that you associate with bread dough. So we're stretching it like this, degassing it gently, folding it on itself like this. Okay, so it's folded on itself. And then I'm actually gonna rotate my bowl, do it again, stretch, and roll it on itself. At the end of this, you'll have just sort of like a nice, tight, compact little dough ball, and you will cover it again and come back to it an hour from now. It will be spread in the bowl again, and you will do the same exact turn. This is same dough, larger batch. It's been bulking for 4 hours. You can feel it's nice and gassy, lots of carbon dioxide action happening there. You can see sort of bubbles. Again, we'll do our float test. Wet your fingers just so you can get like a nice little pinch. I didn't do that much of a pinch. It floats so well. Once our dough is bulked, it's important to divide it so that you can then shape it. We're gonna pre-shape it and then shape it into one of these two shapes. If you don't have these proofing baskets, a plastic bowl would work wonderful with a kitchen rag. If you can find hairnets, so much cleaner. It's the best trick I've ever learned in my life. Dough does not stick to hairnets. You don't have to use any rice flour. You can literally just shape and go directly in it. The reason why people use bannetons as opposed to bowls, even though again, bowls will work, is they're perforated and breathable, helps with the fermentation, helps the loaf proof a little better. Just gonna divide this really quickly. I think like 750 gram rounds is perfect. This is just a pre-shape. This is to help work tension into your dough and have a nice even shape to start with. That way you don't get any like big holes through the center. That way you're also ensuring like a lot of volume in your dough. Once you've shaped these all into nice little pre-shaped rounds, this period of time is called a bench rest. Just allow your dough to relax and hang out for about 15 minutes before you do your final shape. So we'll take a little bit of bench flour. This is something I also recommend. Don't hit the surface right in front of you. Always hit the actual doughs. If you hit the surface in front of you, you'll end up getting flour in your seam, which is actually where you're closing your bread. So flour the top of your pre-shape, lots of tension. Put that side, flour side down. For the round, you wanna pull up on the top of your dough, pull it across the center. Then you wanna take the bottom of your dough, pull it across that line. At this point, you can just close this almost like a book where you fold it over itself. And this line that you have here, that's your seam. At this point, you kind of just want to scoop it up with your seam side pointing up, put it in a basket, just like that. So that is how you shape a round. So now that we're ready to bake, we're gonna preheat our Dutch oven in a 500-degree or 465-degree oven for a half an hour at the least. That way we just make sure it's hot enough to help our bread rise. Here's our beautiful shaped round or bowl that we shaped yesterday, and it's slept overnight. And now we're ready to bake. Our Dutch oven, which we preheated first off, has been heating for, I don't know, an hour, which is perfect. So we're getting ready to load it. You wanna take a non-gluten flour, semolina, cornmeal, rice is kind of preferable. And this is honestly just for loading it. Just have a gentle sprinkling, that much. A non-glutinous flour just makes sure that the dough doesn't stick to any surfaces. So parchment paper, oven mitts. The last thing we'll need is we need a lane to score our bread. This is an essential part of bread baking. Scoring, just make sure that all the gas that's built up in here after all your fermentation has a place to escape to. If you do not score it, it's gonna find its way out through weak spots in the dough. This is called a lame or a lame. It is a little tool you use where you attach a bread knife to it and it helps you score. Be careful at this part because bread knives are very, very sharp. So the angle that you actually have your blade determines whether you get an ear, like those really sexy ridges on breads. That's if you have a flat blade. If you want more decorative, you can actually change the angle of this and move it up to have like a deeper angle, and you can score like various designs, things like that. I like to use parchment. It will help with the loading process, so make sure you keep that beautiful shape, you don't burn yourself. So at this point, I'm gonna get ready to score, kind of go with the shape. If you just want a practical score, basically think like a vent or a hashtag. Directly down, start at one edge of the loaf, go like that, and then just hash it over here. So you have a nice little number sign. Grabbing our preheated Dutch oven. It's nice and hot. Dutch ovens are honestly a miracle for sourdough bread because bread needs steam in order to expand properly. All that steam hitting me. To load, you just kind of grab these guys, set it in, lid it. This makes sure all the steam gets captured in there, and then go back to the oven. At 465, I find this to be the optimal sort of temperature range. And I let that bake with the lid on for 35 minutes. That's a longer steamed period than a lot of recipes call for, but I find it really gives you that really beautiful crust. It's been nearly that amount of time. So here we go, we got a nice little round. We're gonna actually turn our oven temp down and bake for color and crispiness. So for an additional 5 minutes. Our loaf has been, ooh, it's perfect. It's been browning nicely. At this point, just to check and make sure it's done, you can take that nice parchment that you loaded with, and if you got a good hand on it, it might rip, that's okay. So at this point, you have your baked and finished loaf, but we're just gonna double check. This is a nice little trick to do to make sure all the water's evaporated out of the loaf. Hear like a nice crisp knocking noise. If you sort of feel like a thud or like sort of a soft even feeling, your loaf needs a little longer. That can have to do with how much water you have, the flours you have in play. If you use whole wheat flours, there's gonna be more water in your loaf, which means you will have a darker loaf. Now that we've knocked on it, we know it's done, all the water's out of there. We're gonna let this sit and cool completely before we cut into it, just to make sure the crumb sets. I too wanna cut into a loaf of bread when it's hot out of the oven because it smells so good and I'm usually hungry by that point. But it's actually really important to let your loaf cool properly. That kind of makes sure that it's dried, that the crumb is set, and it's not sort of like if you cut into a hot loaf of bread, you'll actually end up crunching the crumb just from cutting into it, which is sad because you put all this work into it. So you wanna make sure it lasts for a long time. All right. Okay, so it's a pretty lacy crumb. I look at this and I'm like, could have proofed a little longer, but still really nice. Open, lots of little activity bubbles everywhere. You can kind of look at your crumb to see a lot of things. I always say it's like checking your work, like what you wish you had done differently. Like this loaf, I look at this, I'm like, let's add more water next time. This is very soft though. It's really delicious. You get like a nice sort of nutty flavor. It's a mildly sour bread, which I prefer. I like a young starter. Something bread bakers will talk about is how sharp or sour you want your loaf to be. And that's sort of a combination of how you keep your starter and how you proof your dough, like the temperatures that you do it at. I brought some butter because I love just eating bread and butter. Please come visit me at Mel the Bakery. We'll give you all the naturally leavened bread and croissants that your heart desires. And it was fun making bread together. There goes a breadcrumb. For the recipe, click the link below and you can make your own sourdough.